Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for coming for the SQL Server session. Super excited to have you all here. So I will be joined with my friends and coworkers, Bob, Erin, and Joe, to talk about the next version of SQL. We have a packed agenda, so we will take all the questions at the end of the session. We will all be around. Please, until then, let's go through the content, and we will be here to answer all your questions. I will start with the one slide you might have seen in the keynote, you might have seen in other sessions. The SQL Server is the flagship product from Microsoft when it comes to the databases. And when we thought about the next version of the SQL Server, these are the three pillars we focused on. The first one is the AI built in. And what we mean by that, and obviously there is AI everywhere, AI has two parts to it. When you think about the productivity applications, whether it is on the office side or on other, it is about how we are giving you the AI to be more productive on those things. But when it comes to the platforms like SQL, it's not just about enabling you to be more productive. It is also, as you developers, how can you build applications which are AI and intelligent applications for your customers and your clients. So that is where we are investing in vector types, in the RAG patterns, and others, and we will spend time talking about that thing. The second pillar is about being enterprise ready. This is the reason like 97% of the Fortune 500 companies use SQL Server. And we want to make sure that we continue to invest in this pillar. This pillar is super important for us. If you only invest in AI and cloud connectivity and others, we will start to lose our customer base, because this is why we are here. This is the SQL Server strength, and we want to make sure we keep doubling down on that one. The last one is that we serve all type of customers. There are customers who want to be in the cloud. There are customers who want to be on-prem. There are customers who are in the hybrid environment. The cloud connectivity makes sure that you keep the data where you want it, but at the same time, you can take the benefit of the cloud. And through Arc, we are seeing that capability being used. We launched Arc almost like 18 months back, and so far we have connected over 8 million on-prem cores to the cloud. These are all the customers whose data is sitting on-prem, but they are able to use the services like Purview, Defender, Fabric, and others on-prem through this capability. So these are the three core pillars of investment for our next version of SQL Server, and we will go and talk more about it. This slide talks about not about just SQL Server, but it talks about in all the platforms SQL is available. Very important to note that what we want to make sure is the consistency. When I say consistency, if you can run a T-SQL on-prem, you should be able to run it in the cloud. You should be able to run it in Fabric. That consistency is super important. It ensures that our customer base can move their applications easily across all these deployment options. We want to make sure the same tools work. If you are using SSMS, it doesn't matter whether you are using it on-prem, whether you are using it in cloud, or whether you are using it in a SQL which is running in some other cloud. The same applies for all the capabilities that we bring. When you think about, oh, SQL announced a new capability, and especially if it is about the engine, you should make sure that we will bring it to all deployment options. When you think about, oh, I heard that there's a new JSON type now available, it will be available across all these deployment options. When you think about like, oh, the vector type is now available, it will be available across all. And that is the power. We don't hold back any capability, any feature. So again, this is what has made SQL popular across all the options that we offer. And again, yesterday we talked about the SQL coming in Fabric. It's the same core engine in a different platform with different capabilities surrounding it. The last thing which I want to make sure that you walk away with is that when we think about the SQL, we think for the long term. We think about like when we start investing in an area, we are committed. Obviously, there have been times when we started going in a direction, and then we understand that was the wrong call to make or wrong area to invest, and we have deprecated features. But most of the time, we have gotten it right in terms of when we go with a feature, we are committed for the long term. If you think about what we started to do on the AI, on query optimization, you will continuously see all the investments we are making. Today in Azure, I will tell you, every month, there are 45 trillion queries that are written against our SQL servers, which are managed by us. All those 45 trillion queries go through our query optimizer. The auto-indexing, we are making it the default. Similarly, when you think about other capabilities, security, you will see security efforts across all these versions. When you think about the cloud connectivity, when we started that, now we are investing on the cloud connectivity in all the features and building more and more on top of it. So that is another commitment, that when you go and you use a capability in SQL, it is not that we will change our mind and then we go in different directions. The consistency and continuous investment is very, very important, and that is why the enterprises love running on SQL Server. So with that one, let me call Bob on the stage, and what we will do is that the 3 pillars that we talked about for the next version of the SQL Server, we will go and double-click in each area and show what we are doing for the next version. So thank you.
Thank you, Saad. Wow. I posted Saturday on LinkedIn a post about the 26th anniversary of SQL 7.0. And I did it like, I think I'm going to go to Ignite. I should go out there and kind of talk about an older version. Maybe people remember that. I was blown away. Like, so many people went and said, oh, that's how I started my career. So many people told me SQL Server is how I've started my career at technology, period. And here we are today announcing the next version of SQL Server 2025. Back earlier this year, my leadership told me, why should we launch this now in SQL Server? Like, why 2025, Bob? You know what I said? I said, because of you. SQL is alive because of you, the community, the SQL family. So take a second right now, wake yourself up, and give yourself a hand. Now, this is not vaporware. And do you know why? Because this is me running the very first setup for SQL Server 2025 version 17.0. This is real software that we have running, and when we start the private preview program, you yourself will be able to dig in and start using the technology. What I'd like to do is kind of dive a little bit into some of the features that exist in SQL Server 2025, but not everything I'm talking about today is what's going to be there in the final product. It doesn't mean that I want to hold something back. It's just that I want to kind of give you a taste of what we think is going to be in this release. And then as you see us go publicly more about this in the next calendar year, you'll certainly hear a lot more. Let me start what I call my innovation and core slide. There are 3 major areas, as kind of alluded to by Saad in that first slide, that we're doing. On the left side is AI technologies. I'll explain what I mean by AI built in a second. Integration with the Microsoft Fabric through mirroring. And then I'm really excited to talk about some new capabilities for developers we're putting into the release. But you may have heard me talk about the term meat and potatoes. So we definitely have innovations and enhancements to our core engine for security, performance, and availability. And I'll also briefly mention those as well. And then at the bottom, these core pillars. You'll hear today, after my section on SQL 25, about the wonderful story of Azure Arc. You'll also see some demonstrations by Erin about the new SSMS with a CoPilot. So we want to make sure that you understand that there's a foundation of things that we're doing that help power what we're doing in the release. So innovation's core engine. Let me talk about the areas of innovation first and kind of dive a little bit more into AI. But first, everybody always asks me these questions when we announce a new version. Bob, like, when is it going to be publicly available? And do you know what I tell them? We will not miss the name. Thank you. Seriously, we will talk more about when they'll be publicly available, but it will be available next calendar year, and you'll hear more about it next year. But all the things you're used to seeing in previous releases, things like licensing and additions, upgrades, and so forth, all of that gets announced at general availability time. But as you sign up for the preview, and by the way, at the very end of this deck is the sign up for the preview. You have to wait to the end to know how to get that link. And by the way, as well, after our session, we will answer questions outside or up at the booth. But as you get through that preview release, we'll seek your feedback about those kind of type things. Okay, let's talk about AI. But every time I've spoken about AI over the last 8 months, and I've done it a ton, people ask me, why should I do that with my database? So let's get grounded on a few terminologies. Number one, you're going to see me demonstrate how you're going to take your data and use an AI model running outside the engine, but using code inside the engine to generate vector numbers, what are called embeddings. These are numbers that language models understand, not you as humans. You'll take your data, generate, and you'll store that inside a data type, a new column data type in your database. Then some sort of app wants to send a prompt, and that prompt can be used to also generate an embedding inside the database, and you'll be able to compare this prompt with your data to do what's called a vector or similarity search. In addition, you'll be able to add in your standard SQL query filtering to do what I call a hybrid search. And you can just do that. You can just run T-SQL commands all day long and do really cool, smart searching with natural language prompts. Or you can also take this application and build a RAG app to take those results along with the prompt, send them to a language model, and get back a really cool, slick set of generated AI responses. That is the basics of why you might use GenAI with your database. Here's the cool part, up in the right-hand corner. This is under the security of SQL Server. You are going to decide who access to AI models. You're not going to load AI models in your engine. And it's all using the standard T-SQL language you know and love. Now, we're pretty serious about responsible AI at Microsoft, but two major points for you. Number one, in SQL Server, you're going to get to decide what AI models you use. And again, you're not going to run them inside the engine. You're going to interface with them. But you're going to use AI models on premises now. Or you can use them in the cloud. And in addition, if you do use Microsoft models and Azure OpenAI, which is an option for you, we do not use your data to fine-tune our models. If you choose your own models, that's up to you and your decision. So I love the story of SQL 2025, like basically bring your own model as per your needs, ground to cloud. Okay, so what capabilities actually exist for this built-in concept of doing RAG patterns in the engine? Number one, we are now a vector store because we have a new vector data type, and we support a vector index based on disk and technologies. We have this idea of model management. Model interfaces ground to cloud using REST APIs. We'll show you in a second an example of actually how that works. We'll be able to do embeddings, so you'll be able to do chunking your text data as you need per how much data you have, and built-in T-SQL commands to generate embeddings to put in these native data types. Well, once you do that, what are you going to do with it? Well, based on that diagram, you're going to do a vector search or similarity search. And there's going to be two different ways you can do it. I'm going to show you an example of what's called a vector distance today. When we have our disk and index in place, you'll do something called a vector search. And then finally, it's not just about doing T-SQL commands. We will integrate with very popular frameworks like LangChain, Semantic Kernel, and Entity Core framework. Some of you may have seen some demonstrations from 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗻𝗂 and 𝗦𝗲𝗂𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 already doing that in the cloud, and all of that will work with SQL Server. Now, I'm a visual person. I don't know about you, but maybe you've seen my presentations before, but I love visual diagrams. So let me show you how this works. So first of all, you're going to be able to use T-SQL to create embeddings based on a connection through a REST API with language interfaces. We're not going to be loading models in the engine. You're going to use REST API, and look at some of the ones you might see out here, like Azure OpenAI, or OpenAI in the cloud, or NVIDIA Triton Server, or 𝗦𝗲𝗀, or K-Server, VLLM. Get ready to learn a whole new language if you're a SQL person. It's actually quite fun, by the way. And then different types of models you've seen in the industry out there are now available to you, even something really fun called Hugging Face, if you've heard of that. So now with SQL, you have all these choices for models running outside the engine, but T-SQL allows you to create these embeddings based on your data and store them as a column in SQL Server. Then you will take a prompt, generate another embedding for that prompt, and now be able to do a vector search to compare the embedding, the number of the prompt, with what's in the actual database. That's what we call a vector search. It's a smarter way to search. You're searching now based on natural language statements. Then you would add other filters like you're used to in SQL Server, giving you that power of what I call a hybrid search. In addition, at some point, you may say, hey, I want to use Azure OpenAI, but I want to do more securely, and Azure Arc is going to allow you to do that. Joe Sack will come in a little bit later and tell you a little bit how that works. Now, afterwards, you may need to create new embeddings with new rows or update your embeddings with changes you've made based on changes in your data. And then here's another cool story for extensibility. This system stored procedure will allow you to connect to any model you want. So let's say it's not one of these model interfaces you see on your screen. I want to connect to something different. You can use this system stored procedure to do it. And again, I want to emphasize this. You control the security of this because we're using the T-SQL language to make all of this work. Okay. So Microsoft Fabric, just briefly mentioned here, you've heard that story a little bit today, maybe at Ignite. We support Fabric mirroring for Azure SQL Database. That's generally available. We support Fabric mirroring for Azure SQL Managed Instance. That's public preview. And now we have private preview sign up here for SQL Server for Fabric mirroring on premises. SQL Server 2025 will also be part of that story. So now, no matter SQL exists, anywhere it is ground to cloud, you can be part of the great story of Fabric mirroring. So excited for you to see that technology. The third part, I'm so excited about. I'm a developer at heart. And quite frankly, I don't think we've done a great job in the past releases of giving what you need as a developer. But get ready for this. If you've not seen the great story of Data API Builder, you can now use GraphQL to go connect to SQL Server itself, really reducing the code for your applications. But we know you want JSON. So now we have a JSON data type, a JSON index is coming, and updated T-SQL functions on top of that. I've got a small demonstration to show you how that works. If you like regular expressions, we have regular expression support inside the T-SQL language now, and other new T-SQL functions coming in this release. And then, really excited to tell you about this. If you're a Kafka fan, we have chain streaming now. You're going to be able to support the ability to consume transaction log changes in a stream and support applications that run with Azure Event Hub, Kafka, and even Fabric Real-Time Analytics. And then I mentioned the REST API support we're giving you to allow you to go to do any REST endpoint, not just AI models. So a lot of rich things coming in the developer space for SQL Server 2025. So let's go see it in action a little bit. Maybe you saw some of this in Shirish's core note yesterday, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about what I mean. So first of all, hey, I'm using the new SSMS 21 Copilot. Erin's, yeah, great. I hear Erin back there. She's whistling in the background back there. So she's going to also show you a little bit more about how Copilot works later. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Copilot to help me connect to an AI model in SQL Server. Now, this is really interesting. This is what we're doing for the future here across SQL Ground to Cloud. We're going to support what's called a model definition. So instead of you having to do really complex REST API calls, you're going to be able to do something like this. You're going to be able to do a create model statement inside SQL Server as metadata. We're not going to load the model in SQL Server. We're going to have metadata in SQL Server that you're going to tell us about, and you're going to give it a name. And then you can go use that name to go things like embedding generations or vector searching afterwards. In this example, this is me using an on-premises AI model interface called 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 through a proxy server. That could be Azure OpenAI, KServe, different types of model interfaces popular in the industry. So the cool thing about this is you control the security of this. It's your decision as an administrator who has access to run the statement and actually use the models themselves. So what does it look like when you use the models? Well, first of all, this is an example you've seen throughout this conference already a little bit about a database called 𝗬𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 here and run a query because I've populated these vectors, this is what it looks like. Do you see those numbers over there? And you're like, Bob, what are these numbers? Well, here's the cool part. You don't have to know what those numbers mean. In fact, I don't know what those numbers mean. But a language model does. A language model understands exactly what those numbers are based on the product name and description that I fed it. In fact, it looks a little like this. So here is me taking the product name and description, concatenating a string based on a given row in my database. Then I'm going to call a stored procedure I built that's going to use that model definition. And it's going to say, hey, take that text, go to you embedding model outside my engine, give me back one of those numbers, and I'm going to go update that column with that data type. Now, the reason I need that information is I want to go do what that concept called a vector search. Well, this is kind of what it looks like. So I'll go over here. This is a stored procedure I wrote. Two important parameters here. One is the prompt, and one is a stock quantity. So notice here, the first call is called get embedding. That's me getting the embedding for the prompt, because I want to do a comparison between that and what's in the table. And now here's my comparison. I use a new T-SQL function called vector distance. That tells me what are the closest rows in the database that relate to that prompt I sent, ordered by distance. The lower the distance, the closer the relationship. And then I want to use SQL Server filtering. I'll just add stock quantity on top of that. That is one of the reasons why SQL Server can be a great choice for AI applications, because you're going to use the power of what you already know in SQL Server and just add this vector distance function on top of it. I call that hybrid searching. It's a reason why relational databases like SQL can be a great choice for you to do this. Now, once you do it, you can just go run the stored procedure. And again, you decide who has permissions for the procedure. I put a prompt in here. Now, you look at that prompt right there. How do you do a search in SQL with that? You can't. But natural language models understand what the word workout means to go generate the proper embedding to compare and look at the results. Is there any word workout in the description or product name? There's no words called that. But a language model understands that a fitness tracking band is a device for working out. This is an incredible new searching capability that you have not had before in your systems with SQL Server. So what could it look like? Well, I built an example application for an on-premises Gen AI app. Let's say the Contosa wireless company that you saw in the keynote, let's say the marketing department inside the company needs a way to help them do things like this. Go build an ad for people that like to work out. So go use the vector searching inside the database that we have for our data and go generate this ad. Now here's the beauty of this. I didn't fine-tune a model for this. I just did this RAG pattern. I augmented an existing model with my data without training it, and it looks like it knows my data. That is the power of why Gen AI may make sense for you with your data. But again, you control the security of how this is run. You control the permissions. You control everything. You control the models being deployed. And the models do not run in the SQL Server engine. We use REST API interfaces to contact them. Super excited to see everyone get a chance to go use this technology. OK, so what about JSON? I thought I'd throw this in here because everybody's showing AI demos. What about just good old JSON? So here's an example of the new JSON type. So I'll go over here, and I'll show you what the JSON type looks like. And here's an example of what you can do with it. We've had JSON before, but as 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃. Look at me. I'm inserting into a table directly JSON documents. That's pretty cool. So easily just taking JSON documents, throwing right into this JSON table. So what do I do with that? Well, natively, I can go pull out a specific property or value out of the JSON document, and then go return the value as a column that looks like a row. Pretty easy, right? That's pretty neat. So I can just use native JSON documents now and get data that looks like relational rows. But I want to go a little bit bigger. In fact, let me show you this. What if I just dump out all the JSON values? What does it actually look like? Well, unfortunately for JSON developers, that's not what I need because it looks like several JSON documents. I need this as one big JSON document. So first of all, I'm going to use a new aggregate function here. This is called JSON array aggregate. So if I go run this now, I can go run this actual query, and what's going to come back is an actual JSON document as an array of single values. So I can concatenate all the data I need. I can use where clauses, whatever I need on top of this, to build properly structured JSON data. Now, another scenario we've seen before from JSON developers is key value pairs. So here, I'm going to use the JSON object aggregate function to take the order ID in the column, concatenate that with the actual JSON document, and now I've got this key valued pair scenario. This is super powerful for a lot of different types of applications out there, and I'm doing this all inside the SQL Server engine itself. So we're really excited for customers to take a look at this. You're eventually going to see the ability for us during this release to do a JSON index on top of that, so that you can do incredible things like joining JSON data with other columns in your database. So pretty cool. That's the area of innovation for us. That's Gen AI with SQL Server. That's why I say it's AI built in, because of all the SQL capabilities in the engine to access AI technology. We talked about fabric mirroring, talked about some of these great development features. I just can't wait until the next calendar year to start showing all the other capabilities to you that we have in this area. But a lot of you sitting back are going, that's really cool, Bob, but I'm a core engine person. As you've heard me use the term meat and potatoes, I'm a meat and potatoes person. I need to see the goods. So let's give you a little flavor of what that's going to look like. So first of all, if you've not seen this concept called optimized locking, it's pretty impressive. Literally, forget about lock escalation. The optimized locking, which exists in the cloud for Azure SQL today, uses a technology to allow you to avoid lock escalation scenarios and excessive lock memory scenarios. I call that like hands-free lock management built in now to the engine, and that's going to come for SQL Server 2025. Well, what about performance? We have a lot in this space we're actually doing. Behind the scenes, a lot of your queries are powered by something called batch mode that you don't even know we're doing yet, and a lot of especially aggregate type queries, or have to scan large amounts of data, which works both for column store and for row store scenarios. So we've got improvements in that batch mode area. Connor Cunningham and his team works a lot in this area. So a lot of that technology is coming both in the cloud and in SQL Server 2025. And then what about column store? We have several enhancements for column store indexes we're doing, including the ability to do better ordered indexing and improvements for column store performance in general. So if you thought that column store is not an investment for Microsoft, we are continuing to invest in this technology because we think it's really important for you for your analytic queries. Well, what about query processing? We've done a lot of work in spaces like intelligent query processing. You've seen us actually help you kind of make your queries run faster with no code changes required. And we're continuing down that path to do that. We've got some additions to the parameter-sensitive plan optimization functionality, some enhancements there. We have the ability to persist statistics on secondaries with Query Store now. Very excited about that one now for your read queries on replicas. And in addition to that, there's some other enhancements we're doing to help you make your queries run faster with built-in query processing. Everything we do in that space is going to be done to make sure you get faster with no code changes required. And then in query execution, a lot of interesting things we're doing there. One of the things that I think is really interesting in this space is that we got to make sure that things run great with the query processors, but when you actually execute things, you need to make sure things are very robust from a plan cache perspective, so enhancements also coming in that area as well. The last side over here for availability is really interesting. So you as a community give us feedback all the time. And I know you're sitting back going, you just never listen to this stuff. We do all the time. And this is an area we really listen to you. We had several customers, really large customers, medium customers, small customers say, look, I love always on availability groups, but there are several situations where I'm stuck in a not synchronizing state. And I have to manually intervene this, and this is really putting my business down. So we took a look at this, and we've enhanced the algorithm in this space inside availability groups to make sure we do a very reliable failover in those type of scenarios. So that is a great example of us continuing investing in the core engine that keeps your data and your business available. And then diagnostics, a lot of rich diagnostics in the space coming to help you kind of look more at what's going on in your availability group. I wish I could tell you more. There is a lot more that you're going to hear in the next calendar year of what's happening in the space of the engine with some really rich examples. I think you've seen me present it more in the community. You're going to see me get out there and show a lot more demonstrations of what we're doing in the space in the engine. And then the last space in this core is security. So one of the things we did in SQL Server 2022 is use the ability for Microsoft Entra to support authentication for SQL Server even on premises. And that's something that we powered with SQL 22 with Arc. And a lot of people started using that technology because they started looking at the power of Entra to be an authentication mechanism. But what was one thing missing? That was something called a managed identity. So managed identities were missing. So we're going to support that now for inbound, but also for outbound connections. Joe's going to talk a little bit here in a second about that. But it's really, really exciting because now passwordless capabilities exist for you for doing authentication, both for connections coming in and for scenarios where you're going outbound with SQL Server. And again, we're going to use Arc to make that a technology all possible. If you not look at Windows Defender, there's nothing exactly new happening in that space, but we'll certainly support that as a core part of doing security for SQL Server 2025. There are other things the team is working on behind the scenes that are all I call customer delighters. And again, next calendar year, you're going to see us talk a lot more about what those look like. A lot of things that are really going to actually make you think, should I make an upgrade to SQL Server 2025? What I'd like to do now is invite Joe Sack on stage to talk a little bit more about Azure Arc technologies. Joe?
Hey, thank you, Bob. Hey, everyone. Good to see everybody. I was telling Bob that I'm the Midwest interlude between two forces of nature, Bob and Erin, so this will be a quiet little section. I'll talk a little bit about Azure Arc specifically. Bob was already talking about that there's going to be some integration here, and I'll speak briefly to it. Big thing I want to just tell you when it comes to Arc itself is a lot of the value is spread across things like I can project my on-prem experience into the cloud. I can do inventory. I can check about my availability group topology. I can run Defender. I can run Purview. In the last couple of years, we've been seeing people move to pay-as-you-go models. And that has been popular with customers that have scenarios where maybe you're running 33% of your fleet at any given point in time. So it has a better return on investment if you have seasonality workloads or if you're working with anything where you have to spin it up and take it down. So we're going to continue to invest in this. I'm going to specifically talk about two areas that are with 2025 next year, but just also know that we have a pretty rich roadmap for Azure Arc enabled SQL Server along with us. And so stay tuned on that. So first thing, and Bob talked about managed identity. We have this support today. However, when it comes to outbound, we're adding this in 2025. What do we mean about outbound? Let's say I want to back up my database to URL. So I want to go to a blob store. You can now use, or you'll be able to use for 2025, the backup to URL through the credentials of the managed identity. Now, the benefits here, no tokens, no signatures, no passwords, so you're moving through the SQL Server executable itself. And again, this will be enabled by Azure Arc. One other scenario that I want to tie in is related to the AI case. So let's say you're using Azure OpenAI models for your work. And Bob had shown you earlier the create model definition. So I'm creating a model, I'm designating the endpoints. We're allowing you to work with many different vendors. In this case, you choose Azure OpenAI. You will be able to use managed identity for that authentication. So excited about that. So I want to, this one I want to bring you through a story. And this is specific to the last year I've been working on Azure, Azure CoPilot, and specifically SQL skills in Azure CoPilot. So we had a natural language to SQL experience that we launched back in March. And we also have like a self-help. So think about a database administrator in a box. And Erin will talk a little bit about this from the SQL Server perspective. During this time, so over the year, we had different models that we needed to use and different reasons why we wanted to use them. So we would use 3.5, lightweight, less expensive, faster model for natural language to SQL, hit the mark, got what we needed from a model perspective. But we used more advanced models like 4 and then later on 4.0 for the self-help and the database administrator type skills like, hey, troubleshoot, why is my database slow? Even within 1 year, we had rotated models. So we would have a model in dev and staging and production, and we would be rotating through them. And some of them we would have to expire and make sure we drain from that endpoint and move to the next endpoint. And before you know it, even for a pretty straightforward set of application scenarios, you had model sprawl. So 2025, along with this functionality of the create model, you can also expect that your developers and your AI folks are going to start building a lot of applications that are driven by AI and will have different needs around cost, speed, and intelligence. We will be providing a single pane of glass through Azure Arc. So today you go in the portal, you see your estate. We will have a similar view where you'll see your models. So I can say, okay, what are my models in staging, in production? What versions are there? You'll be able to do things like revoke access. You'll be able to create and provision new versions. Even with a few small models, you can have several different models in play, and this will allow you to organize that both through the portal and through API calls. So we're pretty excited about this, and like I said, short little interlude. I must say, when it comes to AI and copilots, Erin is going to have more to say about this, so please introduce her to the stage. Hey. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, friends. I'm going to start by talking about SSMS 21. Let me first draw your attention to the upper right of that slide. That's our new icon. Some of you may remember when SSMS originally released back in 2005. Bob talked about SQL Server 7. Some of you also may remember the old days of Query Analyzer, Enterprise Manager, right? It was a huge deal when SSMS was released. And I might be slightly biased as the PM, but I think that this release of SSMS is the biggest one we've had in at least 10 years. I could talk about this for a full hour, but I am going to run through the biggest things that have already landed and then are also coming. So Preview 1, we released last Tuesday, and it is now, SSMS is a Visual Studio-based application, and we are now up to 2022 for VS, which means that we are latest and greatest current. It's based on VS 17.13 Preview 1. And this also means that we have a nice new modern installer. So it is installed through the Visual Studio installer. And to be very, very clear here, SSMS does not require Visual Studio to be installed. It doesn't require a license. It never has. It still does not, right? These two live independently. The Visual Studio installer is a separate app, which is how you install it, which means you now also can update automatically. You don't have to go download a 600 meg file again and install it. This can all happen within the app for you. It also means that we get to 64-bit, which has been a huge request for a very long time. Reminder, just because you can return 10 million rows in the output doesn't mean you should. But you know, you do you. And we also now have support for Git. This has been a long-standing request. In fact, everything that I'm talking about on this slide and the next are requests. Bob mentioned earlier, right, providing feedback. Do we really listen? I read all the feedback. sometimes probably to my own personal detriment. But I read all of it, and folks have asked for Git, it's back. We also have improvements in the query editor. Those of you that love the vertical tabs in Edge, that would be me, we now also have vertical tabs in SSMS. There's a host of other improvements as well in the editor. Again, some of these we just pick up for free because now we're on the latest and greatest Visual Studio. We also have a brand new always encrypted assessment. The always encrypted team is fantastic. They've been doing some strong work, and we were thrilled that they were able to land this in Preview 1. So this is all there. You can go download it now, go run with it. What's coming, or what's in progress and what we'll be bringing, improved Azure authentication. We're picking up Visual Studio's method for Azure Auth. It also means that you can auth into GitHub, so if you're doing anything with Git, that's going to be there. We also will continue to have extension support, and it will be even better. Right now, we're going for parity with what we have in SSMS 20, so you can create and install an extension. You use an EXE or an MSI. We want to get to the next phase, which is you can actually use the Vizix installer. We'll have a place on the Visual Studio Marketplace where you can search for extensions specific to SSMS. My hope, by the way, is that we'll be able to leverage an existing extension that's available in Visual Studio for code formatting for SQL. This has been a huge request. There's an extension for that. I'm hoping that we'll be able to bring that into SSMS as well. We also now have the ability to create logins and database users for Azure SQL. You used to have to script this, it was just so much friction there. We've taken that away. You can now do that within the UI. We will be bringing a new connection experience. This is not there yet. We're going to start working on that very soon. This allows you to name the connections. We're going to bring the database drop down to the front panel. We're going to have a connection string. I'm very excited. This will be the first redesign of that experience since that initial release back in 2005. We've also introduced dark theme. Probably, I know, ooh, I heard that. Love it, thank you. We are so excited to bring this. It's been a request for a long time. I really asked engineering to understand what this investment would be. And they did, and they were like, okay, we could do it. And I was like, okay, great. And we can't do it all at once, because if we wanted to do all of SSMS, if we wanted to do every single dialogue, we would have to pause all this other work. And you don't want that, right? And we don't want that. So we're going to do this in parallel, which means that we're going to be rolling out dark theme to dialogues over time. We've started with Object Explorer, with the editor, with the results pane, with Template Explorer, with registered servers, and we're going to work out from there. So my request is, one, be patient, because it takes time to hit all of those dialogues. May not even happen by the time we GA, full disclosure, but we're going to get there. And we're going to start with the dialogues that folks use most, and then work through the app. We are also going to work towards support for ARM64. This is a lot. Releasing SSMS 21 was a lot. I say that we really rebuilt the application. Support for ARM64 is a whole nother level. Thankfully, we have an engineer who is like, I'm so excited to work on this. And I'm like, I'm so excited that you're so excited, because I have no idea what you need to do here, but it's a lot. And then we have CoPilot, which Bob had mentioned and Joe also mentioned. This is CoPilot in SSMS. This has been so much fun to get to be a part of. And I'm really excited because it brings the experience of AI to SSMS. And it is a benefit regardless of where you are in your data professional experience. So a few principles that I need to highlight, because this is what comes up very quickly when we start talking about CoPilot. First, the responses are grounded in your environment. Now, what that means, grounded is really important. You heard in the keynote discussion about that. For SSMS, what that means is that it knows what version of SQL you're connected to. So it gives you answers appropriate based on that. And then it also has information about your database. So it understands what objects exist. So if I'm asking it a natural language question to help me write a query, it can understand what objects exist. Now, it only has access to what you have access to. If you don't have access, if a user doesn't have access to view a table, it can write a query, but it won't be able to return any data for that particular table, right? So if the user doesn't have permissions, then CoPilot will not have permission either. And then I want to reiterate this because this comes up so frequently. I don't want your data. I really don't. I don't want to know anything about it. And we're not retaining any of it. We are not retaining the prompt that you send. We're not retaining the response. We're not retaining any metadata. We're not using that to train, to retrain. Full stop. Now, the architecture for this, I'll be available to talk more about this afterwards. It's a RAG-based semantic kernel implementation. And it also is it's architected as a bring your own endpoint, which is going to give us so many options in the future. Right now, we are restricting it to endpoints within Azure OpenAI. But eventually, you would be able to have an endpoint locally. So for those of you that don't want to go out to the internet for your Copilot, that want to have a model internal, you'll be able to do that. And then the cost, this is a big question. This really depends on the deployment, the quota, the model that you use, the volume of use. For private preview, we're going to cover the cost. Optionally, if you want to use your own Azure OpenAI resources, you're more than welcome to do so. But for private preview, we will be covering that as well. So let's take a look at what this looks like in action. So we're going to start with, we're connected to SQL Server 2022. And with this connection, I'm just going to say, OK, Contoso Wireless, let's go on that theme. I want to create some databases or some tables for this database. So put yourselves in the shoes of the developer, right? I need a little bit of help figuring out what tables I need and what columns, data types, et cetera. And so it's going to go through and say, OK, we're going to do customers, we're going to do products, we're going to do orders, order details. And it's generating the T-SQL for me for all of these. I also asked it to create the clustered index, which it did, define the primary key, which it's done. It's also created foreign keys for me. I didn't even ask for that. Hallelujah. Let's take another step further. Are there any other indexes that I might need based on how I'm going to query these objects? And so it says, well, let's see, you might query these particular tables for these particular columns. Let me go ahead and suggest those non-clustered indexes for you. Great. Now I want some sample data. Right? As a developer, it's nice if I actually have some data to play with in here. Generate that for me. Right? I'm not worried about how much data. I just want you to generate something that has some variability. And I specifically said, give me like first name, last name combinations, and give me city-state combinations. And so it's creating the T-SQL for all of that, as well as the insert statements for me as well. Now you'll notice here that for the products, it's using known product names. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want you to generate random ones. Use the Greek alphabet, use the phonetic alphabet, create the object or create the product names that way. And it's like, all right, I can do that. And so now it's going to go ahead and generate those same insert statements, but this time with the object names based upon the Greek alphabet, based upon the phonetic alphabet. Now you'll notice that I've just been asking all these questions. Not once have I stopped to copy and paste this into the editor. That's because I can export this chat. So I can save this out as a markdown file, which I'll go ahead and do here. And then once I've saved it out to an MD file, I can now open that with an SSMS 21, because we actually in 21 have a preview editor or preview viewer for markdown files. So once I do that, now I can view this in the markdown. And this allows me to save this, to go back, to share it with my friends, to say, here's what Copilot recommended. What do we want to do with this? Pretty cool, right? Yeah. But we're not done. We're not done. Now let's go to dark mode for those of you who like dark mode. And I know that might not be all of you, and that's cool. But if you do like dark mode, we're going to go a little bit faster here. And here we're going to start in Azure SQL. Really important to remember, Copilot supports SQL 2022, 2019, 2017, 2016, Azure SQL, Azure MI. All of it, right? Just like SSMS. But we have that connection context. So now from the DBA perspective, let me just verify what version of SQL we're on. OK, we're on Azure SQL. Now, as a DBA, I would normally go look at MSDB if I wanted to know about backups. In Azure SQL, it doesn't work that way. So I'm going to say, OK, tell me about the last database backup. It says, OK, sure. Here was our log backup. It was the 19th. All right. I want actually the full backup because I'm the DBA, and I want to know when the full backup was. So give me that and all of the log backups since then. It says, all right, I got you. It's going to list them in table format, by the way. And once this comes out, I'm going to scroll back up here in the outputs so that we can show you that it started with the full. I got a lot of log backups going here, but it starts with the full. Now, I want to understand what my RPO is, my recovery point objective, because as a DBA, I would design my backup and restore strategy based on that RPO. But I'm going to just ask CoPilot, tell me what that is. And so it's looking at that backup information. It's saying, oh, looks like you're about 5 to 10 minutes. Now, on the maintenance track, I want to switch to talking about stats. What stats are out of date? As a DBA, this is something that I had job set up for. But let me see what I've got going on here. And it says, well, before I do that, tell me what your criteria are. Are we caring about how much data has been modified? Also, do we care about time frame, like how old are the stats? And do we want the entire table or only interested in tables of a certain size? And so I'm like, OK, more than 5% change. They haven't been updated in a week, more than 1,000 rows. And it says, OK, it's going to think for a second. And it's going to go ahead and run the query in the background for me and then give me the list of stats that are out of date. Now, pro tip number 1, don't use the CoPilot sidecar chat as a results grid. It just isn't going to work. Even though I can widen it, it's not great. So now I'm going to say, OK, tell me what the query is here. What query did you use for this? So it's going to say, no problem. I'll bring that up for you. Once that comes up, I can go ahead, copy, paste that into my editor. And from here, I can run that query myself, which is a much easier thing to do. So at this point, it's very easy for me to understand exactly what stats are out of date, haven't been updated. You like what you see? You want to learn more? All right. So if you want to sign up for private preview, we have, this is where you want to take the screen. So I know that the music's starting. This is like the Oscars where they start playing me off, right?
This is like the hook.
I feel really cool. Yeah,
Here's the big slide.
This is your big slide. Understand the requirements at the bottom, please. And you can chime in here if you need me to stop talking.
No, you keep going, Erin. You're doing great.
You need to have an NDA, right? If you're using CoPilot, I need you to have an Azure subscription, even though you won't have to use it. If you're using 2025, you're going to need to have Teams. Okay? So we will be around to answer questions.
We're going to be out in the hallway afterwards and at the booth as well. Hey, SQL is alive, folks. Have a great session.
So is SSMS.